It's me, Miss Borek, and I'm so excited that you're back again for another chapter inside our book called Flat Stanley, His Original Adventures. Today we are on chapter 3, okay? We read chapter 1, we read chapter 2. In chapter 1, we described our friend Stanley. In chapter 2, we sequenced the events that led up to him getting to California. But today we're going to switch characters. Today, we are going to focus on the character named Arthur. Arthur is Stanley's, can you guess? Brother. Yes, today we're going to focus on Stanley's brother, Arthur. So if you look over here, you can see I have Arthur's name right in the middle of my map, and we are going to be answering that question because, as always, when we read, we have a purpose. Today's purpose is... how can you describe Arthur? Now, very similar to yesterday's lesson, I will not be creating the map for you. This is something you are going to have to do by listening carefully to this story that I'm reading and making your own map. Are you guys ready? I'm ready. We're on chapter 3. Chapter 3 is called Stanley the Kite. Sounds interesting. Let's get started. Mr. Lambchop had always liked to take the boys out on Sunday afternoons to a museum or roller skating in the park, but it was difficult when they were crossing streets and moving in crowds. Stanley and Arthur would often be jostled from his side, and Mr. Lambchop was worried about speeding taxis or that hurrying people might accidentally knock them down. It was easier after Stanley got flat. Mr. Lambchop discovered that he could roll Stanley up without hurting him at all. He would tie a piece of string around Stanley to keep him from unrolling and make a little loop in the top of the string for himself to carry. That's so silly. Look at him, look at the picture. He's all wound up. That's funny. Stanley did not mind being carried because he had never much liked to walk. Arthur didn't like to walk either, but he had to. We're describing Arthur. How would you describe Arthur right now? Remember, has to be an adjective. Same, that's what I was thinking. I can describe Arthur as mad. True. Let's keep reading, see if we can find some other ways to describe our friend Arthur. One Sunday afternoon in the street, they met Ralph Jones, an old college friend of Mr. Lambchop's. "Well, George, I see you brought some wallpaper," Mr. Jones said. "Going to redecorate your house, I suppose?" "Wallpaper?" "Shh," said Mr. Lambchop. "Oh no, this is my son, Stanley." He undid the string and unrolled Stanley. "How do you do?" said Stanley. "Nice to meet you, young feller," the man said. "George," he said to Mr. Lambchop, "that boy is flat." Remember? How thick is Stanley? A half-inch thick. A half-inch thick. 1 inch, half of that. 2 equal pieces make one whole. So half an inch. Golly, that boy is thin. He sure is flat. "Yeah, he's smart too," said Mr. Lambchop. "Stanley is third from the top in his class at school." "Phewie," said Arthur. "This is my younger son, Arthur," Mr. Lambchop said. I think we found another way to describe him. Not only is he mad, he also seems a little bit jelly, don't you think? What does jelly mean? Jealous. I can describe Arthur as jealous. Ooh-wee. Let's keep reading, see if we can find some other ways to describe our character, Arthur. "And he will apologize for his rudeness." Arthur could only blush and apologize. Mr. Lambchop rolled Stanley up again, and they set out for home. It rained quite hard while they were on their way. Stanley, of course, hardly got wet at all, just around the edges, but Arthur got soaked. So I can also describe Arthur as wet. Ooh, he does not look very happy. We could actually use another word. a kind of, what's that word called? Same, similar, simile. Nope. Synonym. That's the word we're looking for. A synonym. A synonym is a word that means the same or very similar. So since we already said Arthur was mad, we could now say he was angry. We can use a synonym to describe him. Since we don't want to sound like robots in our writing and our speaking, we're going to use a synonym, a word that means the same or very similar. So I can describe Arthur as, what was that word? What was it? Angry. You're right. And boy, does he look it. Later that night, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop heard a noise out in the living room. They found Arthur lying on the floor near the bookcase. He had piled a great many volumes of the encyclopedia on top of himself. "Put some more on me, Arthur," he said. Arthur said that. Let me read that again. That's what good readers do. That didn't sound right to my ear, and it didn't make sense to my brain. So let me back up and read again. "Put some more on me," Arthur said. So he's piling all these encyclopedias, these big old thick books on top of him. Why do you think he might be doing that? Remember, he's jealous of Flat Stanley. And Stanley became flat from books and a bookshelf and a bulletin board smushing him. So I think he's trying to get flat just like his brother. He sure is jealous. Jealous. Ooh, all right. "Don't just stand there. Help me," Arthur said. And Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop sent him straight to bed. Oof. But the next morning, they spoke to Stanley. "Arthur can't help but be jealous of you." Oh, we were right. He is jealous. Yes. Good job, guys. "Be nice to him. You're his big brother after all." The next Sunday, Stanley and Arthur went back to the park by themselves. Oof, that doesn't seem safe. I would always recommend you going to the park with an adult. The day was sunny, but a little bit windy too. And many older boys were flying big, beautiful, enormous kites with long tails made of all of the colors of the rainbow. Arthur sighed. "Someday," he said, "someday I will have a big kite, and I will win a kite flying contest, and I will be famous." Oof. Sounds like he's a little jealous, and since we already said jealous, I'm looking for a synonym, a word that means the same or very similar. So we could say I can describe Arthur as envious rather than jealous. So we want to use a different word so we don't sound like robots, right? All right, friends, let's keep reading. So his brother wants to be famous like everyone else, he says. "Nobody knows who I am these days." Stanley remembered what his parents had said. He went to a boy whose kite was broken, and he borrowed a large spool of string. A large spool of string. That is like a big old roll of string. So he borrowed that from him. And he went back to his brother and he said, "You can fly me anytime," he said. "Come on, Arthur." He attached the string to himself and he gave the other end of the spool to Arthur for him to hold. He ran lightly across the grass, sideways to get up speed, and then he turned and met the breeze. Up, 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 up went Stanley, being a kite. You see Stanley? Oop, wrong side. There he is. That's awesome. He's helping out his little brother, just like his parents asked. Maybe Arthur will change his feelings, and by the end of this chapter, maybe he won't be mad and jealous anymore, or envious and angry. Let's see. He knew just how to manage the gust of winds. He faced full into the wind if he wanted to rise, and he let it take him down from behind if he wanted to gain up speed. He had only to turn his thin edge to the wind carefully, a little at a time, so that it did not hold him, and then he would slip gracefully down toward the earth again. Arthur let all the string out and Stanley soared high above the beautiful trees in his red shirt and his blue trousers. What's another word for trousers? We know that. Yes, we do. It's jeans. And his blue trousers were against the pale blue sky. Everyone in the park stood to watch. Stanley swooped right and then left along the mat, and he matched his swoops back and forth, left and right. And he held his arms by his side, and he zoomed close at the ground like a rocket, and he curved up again towards the sun. And he side-slipped and circled and made figure eights and crossed the stars. Nobody has ever flown that way. Stanley Lambchop flew that day. Probably no one ever will again. After a while, of course, people grew tired of watching, and Arthur got tired of running around with an empty spool. Stanley went right on through, showing off. 3 boys came up to Arthur and invited him to join them for a hot dog and some soda pop. Arthur left the spool wedged in the fork of a tree. He did not notice that while he was eating his hot dog, that the wind was blowing the string, tangling it about in a tree. The string got shorter and shorter and shorter, but Stanley did not realize how low he was until the leaves brushed his feet, and then it was too late. He got stuck in the branches. Poor Stanley. He was stuck in the branches. 15 minutes passed before Arthur and the other boys heard his cries and climbed up to set him free. Stanley would not speak to his brother that evening. Now Stanley's mad. And at bedtime, even though Arthur had already apologized, he was still cross. Ooh, another synonym for mad or angry. Cross. So you could describe Arthur as angry, upset, mad, or even cross. 4 different words that mean the same or very, very similar. Alone with Mr. Lambchop in the living room, Mrs. Lambchop sighed, and she shook her head. "You're at the office all day having fun," she said. "You don't realize what I go through with these boys. They are very difficult." I bet you that's how your parents are feeling right now, having you at home all day long. Whew, they might be feeling like you're a little difficult. Hopefully, you're keeping yourself busy and watching this video with me so they can have a break. "Kids are like that," Mr. Lambchop said. "Phases. Just be patient, dear." Oh, and guys, guess what? That's the end of chapter 3. I hope that you are paying very close attention as I was reading to you. And I hope that you have at least 3, 4, maybe even 5 ways to describe the character in our story, Arthur. Now remember, Stanley's our main character and Arthur is our secondary character. That means like a backup character. Okay, but I also want you guys to be working very, very, very hard on describing Arthur. Describe Arthur. Create this bubble map on your own. If you're not sure what a bubble map is, let me show you. Here you have your character in the middle. Out here you have your branches. Here you put a bubble. And inside that bubble, you write that adjective. Angry, mad, envious, jealous. Okay? Put those words in there. Come up with as many as you can to describe the character Arthur from chapter 3 in Flat Stanley, his original adventures. And let me know what you come up with. If you are in my class, this assignment will be on Google Classroom, so please check it out. If you do not have access to the internet or you're not in my class, please, please, please write this in a journal. Write it in a rando piece of paper. Write it anywhere your parents will allow you to, or whoever takes care of you, babes. I love you guys. I miss you. I thank you.